Song for the Imps. How about a song for the Imps? There we go then. Come on, let's get some of the lads together. Let's have a good old Imps song, yeah. Okay, yeah, all right. Go on, fellas. Get around a piano. Let's have a good go on then. You ready? Come on, you lot. Go on in.
Oh, 'tis our delight for the red and white. The Imps are here to stay. Oh, 'tis our delight for the red and white. The Imps are here to stay. Lincoln City are the team, the Reds is their name. Stinsel is their home ground and football is their game. So come and cheer them on, you mad, support them all the way. Oh, 'tis our delight for the red and white. The Imps are here to stay. Oh, 'tis our...
Morning all, how we doing? I'm up here in the chilly Lincolnshire Wolds once again, but it's bright, so that's nice. Nice bright morning. Wanted to do a quick dog walk, get a bit of a catch up in. I'm doing the podcast tonight, so it's myself and Chris on the podcast tonight. Ben will be joining us briefly. We've got a super special announcement for people that you're going to want to hear. So certainly have a listen to the podcast tonight, because if you're in and around the Lincoln area, second week of February, could be very beneficial. So stay tuned for that. That'll be coming out hopefully tomorrow morning. But I thought I'd address a couple of things now that I don't think we'll get time to do on the podcast, because we've got obviously a game to look back on, we've got a game to preview, we've got the accounts to dissect. So there's quite a lot to get through on the podcast, and we don't usually go in too much to rumours, but there have been a couple of rumours jumping around recently, and I wanted to address one of them. It's nice to see Cornell on board. Morning, Cornell. He's got the rumour here. Many Notts County fans on board, I'm sure, will want to know. Well, hopefully, we'll want to know what we've got to say on this as well. But he says, do you see us Imps pulling off this transfer for Macaulay Langstaff? Well, the short answer, Cornell, is no. No, I don't. And I wanted to talk a little bit about why the rumour surprised me, why it's viable, or why it seems viable, why it then surprised me, and why I don't think we'll pull it off. So first of all, why does it feel like a viable rumour? Well, it's an in-form National League striker. Scored plenty of goals for them. I think 5 in 12, but he's scored sort of, I think, 17 odd goals this season in total. So he's doing well at National League level, and when any player does well at National League level, it alerts teams in both the Championship and in League One. So yeah, it's understandable that Langstaff is being linked with clubs. I think he's been linked with much bigger clubs than us. But it's understandable that teams will be looking at him and thinking that he would make a good investment. We made an investment from the National League last season, Ben House, and I would imagine some Lincoln fans are saying, well, we bought Ben House from the National League, why can't we buy Macaulay Langstaff as well? Numerous reasons, which I'm going to come on to. So I can understand why the links have been made. So what are the rumours? Why have they come about? Well, they've come about because there was apparently a Nottingham Post article went out that said we had placed a bid for Langstaff, which was then deleted in haste. Now, I was aware of that. I hadn't seen the actual report, but I was aware of that. Then Matty Hewitt from, I think it was the Sunderland Echo, he's a former Lincoln lad. I think he wrote for the Lincolnshire Echo for a while. Put a tweet out saying that there were rumours that we'd been linked with Langstaff, whether that's from the Twitter thing, whether it's from agents, I don't know. So he's kind of gathered a little bit of momentum from there. And I think I first heard about it a couple of days ago when I got a DM from somebody saying, have you seen the news? And then obviously I think it broke more yesterday. So very different definitions of news, I think, in today's environment. I remember a couple of weeks ago somebody came to me and said, have you heard the news? Liam Scully's leaving the club at Christmas. And you think, well, it's not news, is it? It's rumour. News and rumour are very different. So bear that in mind again at this point. It isn't news that we've bid for Macaulay Langstaff. It's rumour that we heard we're interested in Macaulay Langstaff. So it's important, very important. So I can see why we might be linked with him. I've looked at some of the Notts County reaction, and there'll be some Lincoln fans will look at it and get quite indignant. County saying, it's a sideways move. It wouldn't be any better than what he's doing now. We could be in the same league next season. We move to a bigger club than Lincoln, and I'm sure there'll be Lincoln fans out there going, grr, but they're National League, grr, we're League One. But he reminded me very much of when Scunthorpe United were linked to Alex Woodyard. Now, I did exactly the same thing that county fans are doing right now. Scunthorpe, that would be a sideways step. If he's going to go somewhere, it would be a better team than Scunthorpe. We're the same size as Scunthorpe, even though we're National League and they're League One. So it would be remiss of me to now get all angry about to Notts County fans for saying the same thing, when actually it is true. They're in the National League, we're in League One. That's the difference. In terms of club size, you know, they've got a cracking ground, they've got a good fan base. I don't think there's any pressing need for them to sell financially. Would it be a sideways step? No, in terms of levels. But if the worst happens this season to us and the best happens for them, we're in the same division next season. And then what would Langstaff actually have achieved? Exactly the same as, let's say, Woodyard would have achieved move to Scunthorpe. We actually crossed each other's paths, you know, about a year or so later. So we've got to bear that in mind as well, that when Notts County fans are saying we're a similar size, or when Notts County fans are saying the move doesn't make sense, the truth is that they're being honest. They're not being arrogant. It's not like a team like Scunthorpe saying it, for instance, in the National League. If we were linked to one of their players, or Eastleigh, when we bought Ben House, there was none of that reaction from Eastleigh, because there's an acceptance that Eastleigh probably are a National League team at best. And so when one of their players is linked with Lincoln City in League One, it is a step up, it is a move upwards, it is an opportunity to prove themselves at another level. Whereas for Langstaff, yes, the opportunity to prove themselves at another level is there, but actually, in terms of club size, in terms of setup, and in terms of potential, there is kind of, you know, it's only marginal. We are League One. I get that. They are National League. I get that. But I can also understand why their fans say that it's a sideways, or would be a sideways step. So why won't we sign Langstaff? Well, first of all, I think there's no desire to sell from Notts County. It's not an Eastleigh who are going to look at money that we got for Ben House and kind of go, well, that's going to change us. If we were buying Macaulay Langstaff, it would not financially benefit Notts County to the same level that it might benefit another National League club who was smaller. There would be a benefit. Minimum price they're talking about is, I've seen 500,000 as a minimum. That could go up. There is absolutely no way Lincoln City, with this current model, pay £500,000 for a striker who has only proved himself in the National League. Absolutely not. If we spend £500,000 on a striker, it's more likely to be somebody who is coming out of the Championship and down into League One, who has already done it in League One. When we sign from the National League or the National League South, we are signing potential, we are signing probability, we are signing a possible star. And when you sign players like that, you're not paying big six-figure sums. And you look at Ben House and Charlie Kendall, we know that they weren't big six-figure sums, because the news broke that we spent £300,000 last winter window, in order to stay in this division. And that would include things like players like John Marquis coming in. We signed Ben House, we signed Charlie Kendall, loan players, Liam Cullen, Brook Norton Cuffey, Morgan Whittaker. We made significant signings. Jordan Wright came in. So we know for a fact that Kendall and House didn't cost anywhere near the sort of money that's being talked about for Langstaff. It's just not going to happen. If there's a team in our division that signed Langstaff, it will be a Peterborough United. It'll be a team that can afford 500,000. And I use afford very loosely, because, you know, the definition of afford for different clubs is very different. We probably have the same spending power as a Peterborough United in real terms, but Peterborough will fund, they'll go all in, they'll go over what they earn. MK Dons are the same, they'll go all in over what they earn, they'll pay more out in wages than they bring in revenue, and we won't do that. So there are teams that could afford to spend that on a striker and take the risk. And we've seen it happen at Peterborough time and again. They'll buy a Mo Isa and he might flop, but then they'll buy a Dwight Gale and he'll do well. And he goes all the way back 20 odd years to Aaron McLean and Craig McKell-Smith and George Boyd. You know, we were linked with those at Lincoln City. We couldn't afford to buy them out of the National League. Peterborough could. So if Macaulay Langstaff gets a move, that's the move that he gets. But there's no pressure on Notts County to sell. The boy isn't out of contract at the end of this season. He's out of contract at the end of next season. So no pressure whatsoever for them to move him on. And with that in mind, and with them being close to the top of the National League, they're going to fight tooth and nail to keep him. And when we're shopping, we're looking at the players that maybe we might be able to get a bargain on. Not because we're bargain basement, because we try and get the most for our money. So we're going to be looking at players with 6 months left on their deal. We're going to be looking at players who we might be able to take on a loan and pick up on a free, for instance. I think Shadipo's out of contract at the end of this season. So potentially we might be looking at somebody like him thinking, well, we could take him on loan. Jordan Garrick, bear in mind, just made the move to Forest Green. Had he come in and done well for us and not been recalled or not been sent back, there's a potential that we could have bought him. That's, I think, the type of player we're looking at. It's why you look at Tashan Oakley-Booth out of contract at the end of the season. It's why we're shopping, or why we're bringing loans in at 24, 25 years old, not 18, 19 years old. So when you look at it like that, everything about the Langstaff deal doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. I'm not going to be detrimental to the player now, but he hasn't scored goals in the Football League. So why would a team like us that are looking for instant improvement to the first team take the risk? I'm not saying that he's not good enough. I've not seen enough of him playing. County fans love him. But why would we take that risk? Let's say £500,000, you bring him in and he flops. David Ridings, many years ago, classic example, top National League player, came in to play for us, not good enough. Now, I'm not saying Langstaff is or isn't. That would be remiss of me, because I've not seen him play. Simple. I'm sure he's a very good player. He's doing very well for Notts County. It's an incredibly competitive league. And you could argue that the teams at the top of the National League, probably in their current state, would be challenging at the top of League Two were they in that division. I think that the step up is minimal. And again, it would be wrong of me to suggest otherwise, because that's what I said when we were in that position. So I've got no reason to now start changing my mind on that. So for me, it's just all ends around. It just does not make any sense whatsoever. And promotion to Notts County is worth much, much more than a quick sale of their prized asset this January. I'm not saying we didn't put a cheeky bid in. I'm not saying that we didn't test the water. But links to Notts County players happened last winter as well. Ruben Rodriguez doing really well. We wanted him. He wasn't going to be out of contract. We'd have to pay. Nothing happened. Now, I might be wrong. And if we did sign him, fair play, it'd be a show of ambition. But I don't think there is any chance whatsoever. There is more chance. I'm walking down this track now. There's more chance of me encountering a Lamborghini coming the other way in the next 5 to 10 minutes, in my opinion, than there is us signing Macaulay Langstaff. And that's not to the detriment of anybody potentially involved in the deal at all. If he leaves Notts County, it's a Jamie Vardy to Leicester style move with 750,000 plus all sorts of add-ons that set Notts County up to be able to buy the next best striker out the National League North, or even in their own division, to help them get promoted, and then potentially earn £1 million, £2 million on Langstaff in future sales or future performances if he does well in the Championship. Write that one off now. If we sign a striker, it's going to be, in my opinion, one of two types. It's either going to be a young player, and I think somebody mentioned the name, it's bound to have been Cornell, isn't it? Sinclair Armstrong. So if it's going to be anybody, and Harry Jackson says there, what do you think the likelihood of Lincoln signing Sinclair Armstrong? The type of player we'd probably sign. And bear in mind, we've loaned Midi Shadipo, so it makes sense. We've done in the past where we've loaned two players from a club, Morgan Whittaker and Liam Cullen being the obvious example. I can't think of another one. I'm sure there was one, but I can't think of one off the top of my head. So it makes sense. What doesn't make sense is another loan signing. If we sign Sinclair Armstrong on loan, it suggests to me Tashan Oakley-Booth goes back. I still think that Mark Kennedy likes Tashan. I still think in certain setups there's a role for Tashan. Probably playing behind a striker or playing as a more advanced midfielder in a 3. I can see him playing that like a Ted Bishop role. Whether we want to hold on to him with a view to bringing him in the winter, in the summer rather, I don't know. But if we're signing another player on loan, he has to go. He has to go back, because otherwise he's not going to get football. Matty Virtue's future with the club he's kind of up in doubt a little bit, isn't it? Thank you to Owen. Yeah, we signed Bozzy and Harry, not both on loan though, but we did bring them both in at the same time, and it does happen regularly. So going back, Matty Virtue obviously could be out for, well, say 9 weeks now, because there's been or 8 weeks, because it's been a couple of weeks since he's been out. Michael Appleton leaves Blackpool, so every chance he could be recalled. But if Mick McCarthy takes over, we know that Mick McCarthy is Mark Kennedy's mentor, or one of the people that Mark Kennedy has a huge amount of respect for and who helped get him into coaching. So probably he doesn't take Matty Virtue back, potentially. So it could work well in our favour if McCarthy goes there. Now, if that's the case, and we keep Virtue to the end of the season, and he gets fit in middle to end of March, which is potentially possible. We've got him for April and May, but then we've got him, we've got Harry Boyes, we've got Carl Rushworth, we've got Moshe Depot, we've got Jack Diamond, and then we would have, let's say, Sinclair Armstrong. That's 6, you can only have 5. So Tasham would have to go back, even just for one of those other ones to miss out. So it's saying that we're going to sign players on loan and the media linking us with players on loan is obvious. It's easy. We'll be linked with Blackpool players on loan if Mick McCarthy takes over. But actually, in very real terms, it's unlikely without an outgoing. And if you do bring a striker in like the QPR boy Armstrong, you've then got to leave somebody out. And what sort of message does that send? And you realistically could probably leave Jack Diamond out for 1 game in 3. You could probably leave Harry Boyes out for certain games where we're going to need to go defensive, when we need to do what is a 5 at the back against likes of Ipswich and Barnsley away that we played earlier in the season. But it doesn't send the right message going forward for the loans next season. Oh, well, we'll loan 6 or 7 players and give them sporadic football. You can soon damage your reputation as a club there. So I think it'd be interesting to see. Les Daubney's going back some now. Tony Woodcock and Bert Bowery came in as a pair of loans from Nottingham Forest. I may be wrong, but I think Paul Smith and John Finnegan came in around the same time on loan. And we also signed Peter Gain and Alan Marriott from Spurs around the same time. Did we have a lad on loan from them as well? Neil Fenn around the same time as that. So you can see it does happen in kind of gaggles. Fulham as well, didn't we? Fulham, we took Matty Saunders and Joe Anderson, and the defender Adam Watts came in on loan. We took Eric Lehigh and Chris Hurd from Aston Villa and Nathan Baker. So it does happen. It happens. You bring us 7, and it helps those players acclimatise a little bit. Shouldn't be such of an issue with Shadipo because he's 25. You might be a little bit different. But if you're a young lad coming in, let's say when Robbie Gotts came in from Leeds, and he doesn't bring somebody in or doesn't come in with him, you need something to help you settle. And he had Liam Bridcut going and living at his house with him 1 or 2 nights a week to help him settle. So that's why the Armstrong loan is a potential. The other potential type of loan that I could see is a player dropping out of the Championship, and that takes me back, really, doesn't it, to that kind of, if we were to pay 500,000 for a player, we're not going to, but let's say we've got 200,000 pounds from a transfer. I don't know whether we have. It's pure speculation, but let's say we do have a transfer kitty. Let's say we have placed a bid for Macaulay Langstaff, and let's say it was 150,000, 200,000 pounds, completely kind of speculative. But if we've done that, that means we have some money to spend. If we have some money to spend, we are more likely to spend it on a striker coming out of the Championship. And I'm not saying this player specifically again, I'm talking the likes of Tyler Walker. I'm talking the likes of maybe players coming on loan for a small fee. Lyle Taylor, who was at Nottingham Forest again. That's speculative. Look at what Peterborough did with Ivan Toney. Ivan Toney had been out on loan and he dropped out for a fee from Newcastle. That's the type of player, the type of striker I would see as targeting other than Benjamin. Because if you're dropping down a level, you've already either proven that you can do it at this level if you've been here on loan, like Shadipo did with Oxford, or you haven't proven it at this level, but you've proven at a higher level that you have a certain degree of class. And you're talking then about, players who we have perhaps been out on loan and perhaps done relatively well, like Shadipo, who are now looking for their move. They're not going to break into their team, or they're coming to the end of their career with their team, like Walker. Walker's a great example, and I use Walker because we know him so well. He's exactly the type of striker I would see us signing if we're going to sign one. And that would be the type of player who has done it at this level, has got a certain level of maturity. We're not going to pay, I don't think, like £200,000 for an 18-year-old kid from the Premier League, because you don't know. For every Teo Eden and Anthony Scully, you might get somebody that comes in and flops and doesn't do particularly well. Off the top of my head, I can't think of one that we've had recently. I mean, Liam Cullen didn't do particularly well for us, but he's gone on to do relatively well for Swansea. So that's where I see us kind of shopping, and that's why I think Macaulay Langstaff is. It's a great rumour, and it's bound to gather pace over the next few weeks. And people who don't know what he looked like will have seen him in the Bentley, is guaranteed. but the harsh truth is that it's highly unlikely. The Lamborghini that I mentioned earlier hasn't come past. So, quick question: if you're watching, can you hear the wind at all, or is the sound quality okay? Just want to know. It's not actually that windy up here, so it should be okay. Craig Harvey, can you see Scholes coming back on loan? Can't get in the Wigan team? Absolutely not. No, not a chance. If we sign somebody on loan, I do think it's with a view to taking them permanently, or it's going to be a high impact player like a Brook Norton-Coffey. I can't see us bringing in Anthony Scully on loan. I can't see us bringing in Teo Eden on loan, because they would be loan players that we would be bringing in purely and simply for a 6-month spell. And would Anthony Scully have the impact that a Brook Norton-Coffey would have? I really like Scholes. There's no secret there whatsoever. But where does he fit in what we play at the moment? Would he play as the left winger, the quick left winger on the counter attack? I'm not sure. He's going to bring goals, but no, I can't see him coming back. But he does raise an interesting question about the loan market, and that was really where I wanted to touch upon for the second part of the dog walk this morning, because I'm taking now to lurking a lot on social media. I'm going to be honest. Oh, by the way, Craig Harvey, Jack Marriott, absolutely no chance. Told he can leave. He'll go into the Championship. There's no way we afford a player like that. No way at all. So I lurk a bit on social media now, because there's a lot of accepted rhetoric and the same old questions being asked, and it doesn't get to me. I just can't be asked with it anymore. But one that really piqued my interest and that I did like and I did want to kind of touch upon was from Kev Harris. Now, I've known Kev many years. I was a management trainee 20 years ago at Jackson's when he was at Newark, and obviously I know Matt for just as long, and often disagreed with them on different things, but always respected their opinion. And Kev made a point. There was a screenshot of a Lincoln City team, and I think it was from when we beat Scunthorpe United 2-0 in the 2004-05 season. Great game, live on Sky. Not a lone player in sight. And he kind of made that point as, all our own players, no lone player in sight, too many lone players at Lincoln now. And I'm sure that it wasn't a pointed comment at Lincoln. It was more a conversation around lone players in the game as a whole. And I just wanted to make the point, because people say, oh, another loan, we need our own players, blah, blah, blah. The way football works, I think now, is that if you're not playing the loan market, you're at a disadvantage. If you're not playing the loan market, it's the same as if you own a racehorse. I see Nick Proctor's on, so this will appeal to Nick. It's like having a racehorse but chopping off one of its feet. Do you know what I mean? If you're not playing the loan market, you are at a major disadvantage, unless you are an incredibly rich team. And there are very, very few teams, if any, that we've come up against that haven't had at least one loan player making significant impact in their team. And I think that's the way English football's gone. And for a while, I got a little bit not angry at it, but I agreed heavily with Kev. It's like, oh, we're loaning these players, and then every year they go back, and you're back at the start again. When we loaned Brennan Johnson and Morgan Rogers, we always talk about it, and remember other loan players that season, like TJ Ioma did really well, and Alex Palmer, probably the best goalkeeper I've seen in a Lincoln City shirt. We did really well out of the loan market, and then they go back and you've got to start again. And then you go, next season they come in, the loan players, and Lewis Fiorini and Brook Norton-Coffey and Morgan Whitaker, and they go back and you have to start again. And it's this perpetual kind of motion, this perpetual circle of having players that you fall in love with and then losing them really quickly. And it feels like it's bad for the English game. It really does. And then I think about some of the quality now that we've seen in the Lincoln City team because of loans. Some really good players, and we've had some exciting moments because of loan players. And it even goes back to Joe Morrell, and it goes back to loan players who we took in the title season, like Mark O'Hara and things like that. And it just made me think, actually, are we a little bit better off for that? Okay, these players are not our players, but is Lincoln City's League One football as a whole better off? Does it give teams like Lincoln and Accrington and Fleetwood and Exeter an opportunity to compete with the big boys by getting talent into the side, albeit for a year, that they would never be able to afford under usual circumstances? I get the point about stockpiling at the top end, and there's a whole different conversation around that. And in an ideal world, these players that we're loaning actually wouldn't be coming from Arsenal. They'd be playing for us, and it would filter down. But it's not that easy in principle, is it? Because would a player like Brooke Norton-Cuffy, for instance, let's say he doesn't make it at Arsenal and he does filter down, would he have the same level of coaching and the same facilities and the same opportunities were he actually a Charlton youngster? Same with some of the Forest lads, Brennan Johnson. Let's say Forest hadn't taken Johnson on as a youth and it had filtered down. Would he have thrived with us? I do think it's a really interesting question, and I think the wider English game has benefited from the top flight academies. I think the wider English game in terms of younger talent has benefited from, and I'm going to offend people, the Papa John's Trophy. I'm not saying it's a good or a bad thing. I'm not getting into that argument. But I say for young players coming through, having that senior experience has been absolutely huge. And then I look back at the 2005 season, not that specifically 06, 07, all that sort of stuff. Loan players were very much a thing back then as well. So let's not think that the loan is a new thing. Yeah, I remember players like Neil Matthews coming on loan from Stockport in '92, who we then signed. I remember players like John Cornforth coming on loan, Paul Williams coming on loan, Gary Powell we spoke about a little bit earlier. You go further forward, I can't think of the guy that came on loan in the 06-07 season. Junior Mendes came on loan up front. But the difference there was that these were coming in for 1 month or 2 months or 3 months maximum loans. So if they did well for you, it then created this whole situation. Marcus Richardson had 2 loans with us before we signed him, and all of that was in the same season. Jay Martin came in on loan, did really well, so we had a brief look at him. We want him, came in, flopped after that. None of these players were particularly young footballers. None of these players were kind of like academy prospects that had been in representing their England youth and all that sort of thing. Like they were run-of-the-mill footballers who you would borrow for a couple of months, have a look at, see if you wanted them, and pass them back. And so the loan market existed, and it impacted a team, but it impacted a team sometimes negatively. And I go back to the let me think, I think it was the 89-90 season. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, when at the beginning of the season we loaned Paul Groves. Halfway through that season, we loaned, as I've said, Paul Williams, who went on to play for Coventry in the top flight. We loaned John Cornforth, who was then recalled after he'd become an integral part of the team. And the loan market actually could leave you feeling absolutely desperate. You could get loans at short notice, but they could leave you at short notice as well. At least with the loan market now, you know that somebody comes in, you've got him for 6 months. Okay, that might not always be a great thing if they flop and they struggle, but you know that there's a level of security. And if you know that player is likely to be recalled, which I'm sure clubs know more or less who's going to be recalled and who isn't, it gives you then time to plan for the winter as well. So I think that it's really interesting that the way that the loans market has developed. And I don't think it's particularly a negative thing when people complain that we don't have our own players. I think that if 6 of your first team players, your best first team players, if 6 of them are all loans and your players are run of the mill, then I think probably you've got an issue. But could you say that about Lincoln? Regan Poole, he's ours, very good. Powdy O'Connor, he's ours, excellent. Sean Rowan, in and out, but he's ours, young player, really good footballer. The midfield, probably not so much. Max Sanders, maybe, when he's got the right player next to him. But up top, Danny Mandrew, he's ours. Ben House, he's ours. Charles Vernham, who I think has got potential, he's actually ours as well. So I think that it's, whilst it's an element of modern football that I'm not going to say I particularly think is brilliant or not brilliant. I just think that there are improvements, there are benefits from being able to take players on 6 months loan or years loan, and that there are probably negative elements as well. It is what it is. But I think when we say that we've got too many loan players, I don't think that that's particular criticism of Lincoln City or Lincoln City's recruitment. I think that that's just a general criticism of the way things are at the moment. And let's face it, we play that as well. So we send our players out on loan. Do you think Lincoln United or Gainsborough Trinity or teams like that go, well, we've got too many loan players, when they've got the likes of Jovan and Hayden Cam did really well for Gainsborough Trinity? I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure that they do. Do you think Drahida said that? Well, I've got too many loan players, when Sam Long and Sean Rowan were excelling for them, which they did. last season. Again, no, it's an element of modern football that, you know, we kind of have to accept, and probably one of the least negative elements of modern football, if I'm entirely honest, probably. So there we go. Now, I'll go through a couple of comments before we wrap up, because I see I've got some questions, etc., etc. If I don't put your name up on the screen, my apologies. So Cornell, Sean Simmons, David Larder, good morning. Babs is on, good morning. Suim says he isn't better than what we have already. That's Macaulay Langstaff. That's an interesting observation. So yeah, fair play. Harry Jackson, morning. Morning to Nick. We've already said morning. Brian Rundle, morning, mate. Bloody cold this morning. It is. Owen Dawson, morning. Les Daubney, good morning. Andrew Scott up the imps, great photographer, Andrew, I love his stuff. Craig Harvey, we've already seen, good morning. Joshua Cudmore, sound is fine, mate. Good to see you on board, Craig Harvey, the same. David Spencer, do you see any of the existing loans being terminated? The only one that I could see being terminated would be Tashan Oakley Booth, but it feels like we're leaving it a little late to me. Potentially, I suppose, Matty Virtue, depends who goes in there as manager. But if they go, you know, if they name a head coach or a manager in the next couple of days, and he wants to get Virtue back in, given that he's played well, then that's highly possible. And it would be a bad thing. We definitely need to bring a central midfielder in by my recognition, 100%. So it could be done. Gary Bird, Jaden Stockley would be ideal until the end of the season. Oakley Booth is a waste of a loan. Send him back. Yeah, Stockley's like a Michael Bridges, and he's like a Tyler Walker in that, you know, every time we see him, you think, we want him. And I'm just not sure if he came here, he would have the impact like John Marquis. Who was the boy? There was a lad who played for Chesterfield and Chester, a striker. I can't remember his name. He was another one. He scored goals, and you think he'd be great here. I'm not so sure Jaden Stockley's got the right level of work rate to play in the current system that we play. But then again, I wouldn't say no if we were to take him, but it would have to be, you know, a semi-permanent deal like the Marquis last season. Craig Harvey says, without loans, we wouldn't have been 90 minutes away from the championship. Correct. Kate Jackson points out Franny Green loaned and then signed permanently the next day. A weird way of doing it. It's Peterborough. Everything they do is weird. Nick's on board. Morning, mate. Late to the dog walk as usual. Anything happening on the ins this week? Don't you think you would know with your incessant messaging every day, Nick? But I see you got a defender in yesterday. Well, they needed one. So, again, you know, people come and go. Just because a team is signing players doesn't mean that they're in a particularly good place. So just because Burton have signed a defender, it doesn't make any difference to us for Saturday. We go and do our game on Saturday. Pete, morning, pal. Do transfer windows increase the pressure on bringing loan players in, having to stockpile numbers rather than bring a player in to cover injuries for a month in November or Feb? Yes, 100%. I think that there could be scope for a change to the rules whereby League One, League Two clubs only, for instance, we're allowed one out of window loan per season to cover for the injuries. So you can have 5 loan players, but you can have one short-term loan to come in and cover injuries for a couple of months or something along those lines, but still only play 5. I don't know. It's really easy to talk about how the system could be improved. Like, I really liked when the loan window was the week after the permanent window, but then everybody just abused it by signing on loan with a deal to sign permanently in the winter. So there was no point. You put rules in place to help clubs, and then clubs find ways to circumnavigate the rules to play for to work for themselves. So, do you know what? You can't have nice things, can you? Do you know what I mean? There's that famous saying, isn't there? And it's right. You try and help clubs and they fuck it up. So it's their fault. Darren Speed said we had a young Steve McLaren. Don't know whatever happened to him. I saw one of his games. Did he play against? I think it was Cardiff. We lost 1-0. I'm pretty sure he played there. Kev Green's on board. Morning, pal. James Hoy, I think the accounts being released should give some balance and reality. Losing 50k a week, which is what I understand in this case, is no wonder we can only loan players. I think, I think the fact is losing 50k a week, you're quite right, is a headline and it's big and it makes you kind of raise your eyebrows, but it's a loss that's covered by the owners, but sensibly. So, like, I think if you're losing money, you shouldn't then be allowed to spend more than what you've got coming in on wages. And we're at 90%. It's a lot, and it's frightening. And any other business, that's a serious problem. But in the Football League, it's not. And we're going to go, me and Chris will go into the finances a little bit later on the podcast now that I've had the chance to digest them and kind of read up on them and that sort of thing. But I think rather than saying it's no wonder we can only loan players, I think it's no wonder that we have to lean heavily on the loan market to get quality into the squad. And I think what we've tried to do this year is get more experienced quality into the squad for loan players. Now, whether that's because we want to sign them when they're out of contract, or whether it's because we're looking at players who have played football at this level and therefore perhaps understand it a little more, because there was comments last season, Dan and Lunderloo not quite ready for League One football with it being his first loan. There were some questions around around Liam Cullen, Morgan Whittaker, which I wasn't as kind of, I didn't buy into as much. But I know one thing Michael Appleton said, I can't remember whether it was last season or season before when I interviewed him, that off the record he said, look, I need to get more experience into the side because we were too young this season. I think that was last season. Obviously he then left before that was able to do that, but I wonder if that's a kind of a transfer policy that's carried over, which it should be, because we've got a structure in place whereby the manager going doesn't massively alter our transfer philosophy, which could be why in the summer some of the players that we've signed perhaps didn't have the impact that we'd hoped, because maybe they were already well down the line before Mark Kennedy came in. I don't know. Shane Bradley, we loaned him from Chesterfield. We did. Bad piece of work as well, wasn't he? Ended up getting sent down. And we loaned a few that year, didn't we? We loaned Danny Webb. Came in on loan, didn't he, as well, from Hull City. There was someone else as well up top. We just loaned loads of people. James Hoy says, I'm not suggesting the losses are a negative reflection on the club. It's a system and the pyramid that's broken. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely indeed. Jim West, hi Jim. You can have Callum Patterson from us at Wednesday if you want. Usually when you hear something like that, you don't want Callum Patterson from Wednesday. But at the moment, do you know what? At the moment, I'd take Ben Hutchinson off the bench. I really would, because at least it would be somebody off the bench who might come on and put a little bit in for 10, 15 minutes. And I think that's what we're massively lacking. When Ben House is injured and Tom Hopper's Tom Hopper, we don't have anything we can bring off the bench just to put some legs in the final third. And sometimes against teams like Accrington and Fleetwood and Forest Green, it's been later in the game that we've lost it. And I'm planning an article very soon on how many points we have lost from winning positions this season. And I'm sure there's a table somewhere and I'll look up and find it. But the number of times we've taken the lead and then not been able to kill off a game or not being able to go and get the second goal. And I think that is a reflection of the lack of depth on the bench, both partly due to the transfer policy from not signing another striker in the summer and partly due to the injuries that we've suffered as well. So there we go. Nick Pudsey, hello Nick. I go back even further with Nick than I do with Mr. Harris. I think Nick was plumbing and heating manager when I first started at Jacko's in '99. This week's account showed that mid to lower League One will be our level. It is our level. And 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, that's the level we all would have gone, bloody hell, we want to be there. And when League One's got Sheffield Wednesday and Derby and Barnsley and Portsmouth and Ipswich and Charlton and Bolton and teams like that in it, whew, I'll have that level all day long. Because I got sick of watching Welling and Boreham Wood and Bromley and Salisbury, Ebbsfleet, teams like that. Sick of it. Kate says Danny Webb, Darren Dykes, Steve Watts also 2002-03. That's interesting actually, because Danny Dykes, I interviewed him. He came from Swindon and he had a lot to say about the training facilities and the level of the football, etc. And Steve Watts actually went on to be a top poker player, earned more than £1 million around the poker tables, and managed one of the X Factor winners, I think in 2005. So there you go. Right, so that's me. I'm nearly at the end of my walk now. I've got some more work to do. Then it's the podcast tonight. We've got the big announcement on the podcast. You're going to want to listen to it if you are Lincoln City fans, you are in the Lincoln area, and you are free on Thursday, February the 9th. You are going to want to listen to this. You are going to want to listen to this. I'm just going to actually pick this up from Daz Reed. I see a lot saying we have a problem in Jez George. What's your opinion? A lot of people are saying that we have a problem in Jez George without knowing Jez George, without knowing the job properly, just parroting what they hear everywhere else. And I can see why a director of football who doesn't give a lot of interviews gets stick. But nobody said Jez George was a problem when he was securing Sean Rowan to come over from Ireland, or when he was brokering the deals for Brook Norton Coffey and Morgan Rogers because he had gone over and done presentations at those clubs, or when he brought in the likes of John Marquis and Morgan Whittaker last season, whether they did well or not. When Jack Diamond was getting Player of the Month, nobody was criticising Jez George then, were they? Really, really easy to always look for somebody to blame. And it's like Nick Pudsey just said, our level is lower League One level at the moment, and we need to aspire to be better than that. that's where we are. And why is it that we have to then go, Jez is to blame? I saw on the account somebody saying Jez and Liam's wages would make a big difference. You could take them off. Fucking hell, then how would you run the business without a director of football and a chief exec? It's absolutely, utterly bizarre that people have to find the scapegoat. And when they find a scapegoat, it's one that they know nothing about. And then I see comments like Cambridge fans don't like him. What a sweeping generalisation, and what an absolute of utter pish that is. Okay, there are some Cambridge fans that don't like Jez George, and there are Cambridge fans that do. So you can't then say Cambridge fans don't like it because it's sweeping generalisation. It's like me saying to you guys now, Lincoln fans didn't like Michael Appleton. Some did. You couldn't possibly make the sweeping generalisation that Lincoln fans didn't like Michael Appleton. You couldn't make the sweeping generalisation that Lincoln fans like Mark Kennedy, or that they didn't like Mike Garrity, or that they did like David Kerslake, or that they don't like Danny Cowley, or that they didn't like. It's just utterly baffles me. It really is. And it's that sort of, and this isn't you, Daz, by the way, because I understand you've asked the question, but it's the lazy observations that the whole fan bases didn't like this, or Jez George is a problem. Just a statement like that online. And if that's coming from somebody that's got 10 or 20 followers, you look at it and you kind of think, okay. But if you've got a few hundred followers, if you've got a little bit of influence and you make a lazy generalizing statement like that, for me, that's damaging. It's damaging because it catches. It's like fire. And then it raises questions like that. People come to me and say, what's wrong with Jez George? Is Jez George a problem? And I try and fire back with a question. So what does Jez George do? That'll be the question. Oh, he has the final say on all the transfers. No, incorrect. He doesn't have the final say on all the transfers. Oh, he signs all the players. No, again, there's a process in place. Jez is part of a cog in a wheel, and he's a very important cog, and he does a lot of negotiations with players. He doesn't rubber stamp. I just think trying to pin blame on one person because you don't know them, or indeed because somebody that you know who worked at the club was fired or let go, and Jez was made to do that. It's hard, I think, and I'm not particularly saying that everything Jez has done is right, just like I wouldn't say everything he's done is wrong. But I find that sort of observation, I find it challenging. And you know what? I was actually meant to finish, and there's a farmyard I have to walk through, which I don't normally do the lap of, and I've basically just come on to do that lap. And by the way, I just want to state as well, people will say, oh, well, you're a club stooge anyway, because you do this for the club or you do that for the club. You're a club stooge, you're going to parrot what they say. Do you know what? Actually, I do less for the club now than I think I've done at any point during my time, certainly as the Stacey West. I'm not on the supporters board. I think I've been dropped from the programme because I haven't been asked to do an interview for 5-6 months now. I don't actually do anything for the club at all. When I raise my money for the Lincoln Foundation, the foundation's a charity wing, it's separate from the club. At the moment, I'm probably as impartial, and I always like to think I've been impartial, but I'm probably as impartial right now as I have ever been. I have literally no connection to the club whatsoever. And things like the February the 9th announcement teaser, it's actually been worked out predominantly by Ben, and the club have been really good. One person at the club's been brilliant in Adam Chantry and kind of working towards what we're going to do. But it's not something that I've gone, I'm going to pull some strings. So when I talk about Jez George, I talk about Mark Kennedy, I talk about the club, I do so really now from a neutral position, from a position of you guys as much as anything. And as Pete Summers says, that's the problem with you. You've turned your back on the club. Unlike the problem with you, Pete, which is just hating anybody that has Liverpool on his CV unequivocally. You say that you can make stats say anything you want. You can make former Liverpool players say anything that you want, I think, in the same way. So, quick comeback. So there we go. And finish with Sean. I won't finish with Sean. Sean says there's always going to be a scapegoat when things are going wrong. Yeah, things aren't massively going wrong at the moment. 3 games time could be the case. Critical 2 weeks, hugely critical 2 weeks. And Nick Oxbury, who likes to moan about pretty much everything, says nothing wrong with Jez George whatsoever. And for me, that is rubber stamp. That's like Victor Meldrew recommending a make of car to you. You know full well that car is probably going to be decent, because otherwise he wouldn't recommend anything else. And I've got to say this, Bri Fox, I love this guy. Bri, I hope you're all right, pal. You're our connection to the club. So I like that. I'm a conduit to the club rather than being connected to the club myself. look, thank you everybody for watching. 45 minutes of me rattling on, walking around the Wolds baffles me and amazes me in equal measure that you listen. I want to say massive thank you to the patrons of the site as well. They make this happen. It's thanks to the patrons of the site that I'm able to do the newspaper articles and film this live on a regular basis and all sorts of stuff. So you're all gems. I hope you have a great Thursday. Don't forget to listen out to the podcast tomorrow if you're free in Lincoln on February the 9th. You are not going to want to miss out on what we're going to announce. So thank you, everybody. Hope you have a great Thursday, and up the imps. Come on then, boy.